So hello and welcome to this second lecture on Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. We were reading the play and we are at a point where Nick and Honey are about to make their entrance and things are about to go really bad. So let us just get into the play. And so I mentioned improv in the last lecture and we'll see the importance of improv in this play. Just before he's about to open the door, George says, just don't start on the beat, that's all. Martha says, the beat, what kind of language is that? What are you talking about? So we see that this is something Martha doesn't yet know what he's talking about, that beat. What kind of language is that? And we'll see constantly references to language will come up that, and this act is called Fun and Games, and we have a philosopher called Ludwig Wittgenstein who talked about language games. By language games, he meant that we're all playing different language games, that when we say something, we have our own discourse, our own meanings inside our head that can never be totally conveyed through language to the other person. And the other person in their own context make another meaning of that word that we have said. So we see this is how sarcasm, irony, these take place, right? Sarcastic comments would be like something that of a language game, that you're saying something sarcastically someone, but you don't quite actually be very blunt so that person takes it up as an affront, So that is how language games operate. It's also about not being able to communicate fully what you mean, and this is also in line what Derrida also points out about language, and which he terms as difference. So it is this constant process of difference and deferral. It is a spatial category, difference, and deferral, a temporal category, postponement. So we can never arrive at a true meaning. It's always something different and always something belated. It's difficult to be at the same place at the same time, to actually communicate to the other person what you want to say. In a sense, that is where the paucity, the lack in language to a certain extent comes in. So again, George says the beat, just don't start in on the beat. So remember, the name of the act is Fun and Games. Again, like what we'll see is that this play stresses is that games and fun, it's not always very innocent. Games are not innocent. The rules of a game are not always innocent. Like, let's say you're learning a foreign language, and speaking that language can also be like a game with its own rules. But you would say that the rules of that language are so different from the language you speak, that is what makes it difficult to pick up that language. And that is what can make, let's say, a foreign language very tyrannical to you. Let's say you go to a foreign land where people don't speak a common language, you feel a tyrannical presence of that language in your life, that how will I speak this? Then you're caught in those rules, in those laws. So games and laws and rules are not often very innocent, especially in this play. And we have this saying, it's all fun and games till someone loses an eye. So this is what it feels like. There's this ominous quality about fun, ominous quality about games, that someone might lose an eye or something more precious in the play. And George again says, the beat, just don't start in on the beat. And Martha's still not getting what is it about. Then George says, just don't start in on the beat about the kid, that's all. So you can see that this is something George plants in Martha's head, in a sense, like, okay, this is a game we are going to play. He doesn't even lay out the rules to Martha, like this is what we'll do when the guests come, this is how we'll play. So this is like a free play. This is like games without rules. And as we'll see, the problem of games without rules is that they become chaotic very soon. When you have game bound by rules, you have an umpire or you have a referee who comes and sits and kind of coordinates the rules of the game. But this is a game without rules. Even the players do not know what the rules are. Even the players do not know what they will get. It will probably get bloody, and you'll see, like, there will be probably blows below the belt, which would be illegal in many sports, but there will be. So there are no rules, and it's improv. From now on, it's improv, it's improvisation. The couple, Martha and George, they will just improvise in front of the days. And what that gives this play also a fluid character, which kind of, in a very postmodern way, takes it away from the grasp of the author. that is within the hand of the characters. It's their lives, it's what they choose to, what they might randomly spring on the other people. And if you see the audience here, they also cannot play the role of a referee, they also cannot play the role of a, the person who controls the game. They are also just the witness to what kind of open play, open game this play will soon become. But Martha takes it up really fast. So you see they're a seasoned couple. That's the thing. Like, if you mistake their fighting for something that they do not know each other, which we'll see later on the later acts also, they're a seasoned couple. They have moments of tenderness. Martha says that it's only George who has ever made her happy and nobody else. But we still see this kind of bitterness happening between them. So you can see that they are used to, they are more like a seasoned couple against the new couple that are going to come in. And this seasoned couple has much more aces up their sleeve, they have more games up their sleeves that they can play with the people. And you can see that Martha is just like that picking up. But we'll see later, between Nick and Honey, certain miscommunication, certain impossibility of communication that takes place. So I want you to keep in mind this idea of the improv, that they're improvising, and that kind of creates a sense of what is real and what is not real, what is being made up, what is not being made up, what has source in life, what does not have source in life, this kind of problems. And Martha says, really angered, yeah, well, I'll start in on the kid if I want to. So really angered, if this is a play, they know it's a play, that it's a play that George is introducing, but the emotions are nonetheless real. So that's another thing that Albee does very intelligently, that if you think this is all games, this is all play, this is all like role acting, play acting, then suddenly you see the emotions on the stage are very real, that people are pleading people that do not go there, do not go there. There are emotional outbursts. George suddenly breaks a bottle of alcohol. Someone is really angered. That's why the stage directions come in, really angered. So you see that he puts in these real emotions to show that even the characters probably at this point do not know the difference between reality and truth. If it is being talked about a child, then Martha is saying that he's mine as much as he's yours. So there is no ownership of characters. It's always separate, it's always spread out. There is no authority that can be ultimately claimed. And she says, I'll talk about him if I want to. And George says, I would advise against it, Martha. So it's a veiled threat. It's a veiled. He doesn't say like, do not do it like that. He said, I would advise against it, to coax her on. You see that the game is brewing, that the sense of the game, the sense of the play is slowly coming up, brewing. And just when George opens the door to Nick and Honey, Martha screams, screw you. And when he opens the door, Honey and Nick are framed in the entrance. There is a brief silence because they get to hear that from within the room. And that is the sense of welcome. So again, like in hospitality, when you open the door to someone, if it's an unknown person, you would ask, okay, what is your name? Where do you come from? And if it's someone known, you would say like, oh, we're so happy to have you. How was your journey and everything? But here we see that the guests are rudely being treated to something like screw you. And we'll see the hospitality they receive would be of a similar kind. It's not a very comfortable hospitality. And you can see that Nick, just after he comes in, says to, and I told you we shouldn't have come. So there is this sense of regret that is over this play, but nonetheless, you have to move on, you have to continue. So again, like Martha says, haha, make the kids a drink, and we'll see that references to drinking continue through the play. So they're just guzzling alcohol, and you'd have to think that they're getting drunk and more drunk when they're on stage, which kind of makes them more loquacious, makes them speak a lot more. And you see that the reference to kids. And Honey says that she would have brandy, and she says, never mix, never worry. And you see that honey and brandy are also things that are taken together oftentimes. But she says, never mix, never worry. And that's the thing, right? I mean, if you have a sense of ominousness in the play, it's because the characters in the play are mixing. If they did not mix, it will probably not be of worry. So you would see that it's not only the drinks that are in the question of getting mixed, but characters. Characters are mixing in a toxic way. So if you mix alcohol you'd have to worry, it might get toxic. But there are this kind of toxic people that are coming together and mixing, which is creating another sense of toxicity in the play. And Nick ordered some bourbon on the rocks, if you don't mind. And they said, never mix, never worry. But we'll see in the play there is a lot of mixing that will now continue. Mix up, mixing up stories, not being able to tell, mixing up reality and fiction, mixing up reality and illusion. So never mix and never worry, but the category of the play seems to categorically be saying that, okay, mixing is an essential part of life. You cannot get away from life without this sort of mixing. And so you see here, this is a part, and you'll see certain critics have pointed out that there are certain moments when George tries to kind of connect to Nick, but Nick blocks George from certain connections. So first George starts with like trying to get into a sort of camaraderie with Nick by saying that when you have had as many of these faculty parties I have, then Nick suddenly says, killing the attempted rapport, I rather appreciated it. I mean, aside from enjoying it, I appreciated it. You know, when you're new at a place, again, this idea of being new at a place, being as a foreigner arriving at a place, looking for hospitality, and these parties are like ways of extending hospitality to a person, which George especially says he's like tired of. And so we see that tiredness kind of comes into his ability to extend hospitality also. And George eyes him suspiciously. So this is one rebuttal from Nick in George's attempts to connect with him. We see that will always be this disconnect with George and Nick, and they will have fights on different matters. And Honey says that when they would have to live at other places, they had to make way all by ourselves. There's a sense of loneliness that is highlighted everywhere. And yeah, and you see, you must be Mrs. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so's wife. It really wasn't very nice at all. Again, like if you remember what I pointed out during the introduction of the characters, that the men were introduced as the husband of a woman, not the other way around. But we see that the social norm that Albee is subverting there being mentioned here. Honey says that it's always Mrs. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so's wife. The woman takes a back character, takes a secondary character, which quite doesn't happen in the play. So we come to this point where it says that Martha saying that she calls it extraordinary opportunity. What is it that she calls an extraordinary opportunity? She means that married to the daughter of the president of the university. So Martha kind of talks of it as a marriage of convenience, that if you're married to the daughter of the president of the university, you should be able to move up the ladder, take more importance, like we'll see. And George somehow hasn't been able to do that. He says that I am in the history department, I'm not the history department. But the expectation was George would become the history department, he would become a figure of authority. But again, like to become a figure of authority, of patriarchal authority, it's impossible for George, because George also feels that he has been emasculated in certain ways, and he constantly makes references to this process of emasculation, that he feels he has been emasculated in different way. For some men, it will be chance of a lifetime. Yes, and Martha says some men would give the right arm for the chance, to which George says, alas Martha, in reality it works out that the sacrifice is usually of a somewhat more private portion of the anatomy. So we see like these euphemistic references to emasculation, and we'll see that as we spoke about language game, euphemism is also euphemism or circumlocution is a very important part of language games, because you're saying something without saying it. It is an ideal form of language game. Here, Martha says, won't you show her where we keep the euphemism? Martha, George says that. Martha says, what? Oh, sure. I'm sorry, come on, I want to show you the house. So you see that euphemism, there's this time it takes to pick up on some things, and there is this some things that they pick up right away. Like, okay, we'll play this, but this is something that took, so this idea of delay, instant. These are something that are very important in the play. Pauses, uncomfortable pauses, these are very important in the play. Again, George tells Martha, just don't shoot your mouth off about you know what, constantly reminding her that this is a game that we need to play. We need to start playing it. When will you play it? And he tells her to talk about it by telling her to not talk about it. So you see how language games, how telling not to do something is a form of asking that person to do something in a convoluted manner. And so here is the part where George and Nick are sitting together, and George again tries to pick up some camaraderie with Nick. So that what were you drinking over at Parnassus? So Parnassus, again the reference to Parnassus is important. Parnassus is a mountain in Greece which is supposed to be the abode of Dionysus, and Dionysus is also the god of drinking and tragedy of in the Greek mythology. So we can see both happening here. There was drinking, and the play has a tragic tone to it. So tragedies in ancient Greece would be performed in honor of Dionysus. So, and again, like I mentioned, that the references to ancient Greece kind of help to stress a sort of decadence of modern day America, just the same way that Eliot would do it in The Wasteland. So he's talking about certain kind of deadness of modern day America. So that kind of it works as a parody. So the Greek banquets, those Greek drinking, those performances in honor of Dionysus, those are parodied in a sort of a deflated. Those myths are deflated of whatever sort of seriousness, this classical impetus they might have had. And Nick asks over it. So Nick talks at the place Parnassus, and he cannot pick it up. So again he says Parnassus. Nick says, I don't understand. George says, skip it. So you see that George has a sort of intellectual, he forms within a sort of intellectual discourse which is very alienating to Nick. Nick cannot do the same. His intelligence works in a different manner, and we'll see that. So George cannot say anything other than just skip it, because that form of making connection with another human being is very difficult. That's what we say. We get this sense of isolation also, very lonely, very isolated people that are living here. And George says, it's just a private joke between little old Martha and me. So you see, they share private jokes, they have their inside jokes, just like any old couple would have. And the place they stay in is also called the Carthage. It has reference to Carthage. So Carthage also stresses that, the reference to old myths where there is a destruction, and Carthage was destroyed, and we'll see that there would be other places mentioned in a similar way, creating a sense of the apocalypse. And George and Nick are saying about what motivated them to get into teaching. And so here is at a point, Nick says, I said, I imagined they were. And George was just countering. He said, you just finished saying that the things that motivated you were the same things that motivated me. And Nick says, I said they imagined they were. So again, you say language games coming in, that he can say, when I said that I imagined they were, he didn't quite actually mean exactly that they were. So he cannot be held against his word. You can slip and slide out of what you say by playing these language games. And language games are like if you see post-truth politics, if you see someone like, Trump, something the word got, it was also named the word of a year by Oxford Dictionary, post-truth. So what was post-truth? Post-truth was this going beyond truth, in a sense of truth taking, the idea of that we must be speaking the truth, taking aback against these language games that you can play. Or you can say, no, I didn't actually mean this, I meant something else, when you're being proven wrong. So you can see in the contemporary American political landscape how such a play like this would hold great importance, by how language games can help in this kind of post-truth politics. And there's constantly this reference. I would ask you to read this play. We cannot go through each of those references here for the lack of time, but I would really ask you to read the play and figure out these references, that they have to constantly say, no, this is what I meant, not that, this is what I meant. So, which hints at, and Nick says, oh, I thought you meant. So there's this slipperiness that, oh, I don't really know what this other person means, what this other person is saying. So, and you can relate that in your reading with language games and the impossibility of direct meanings of language as a vehicle that is incapable of conveying the exact sense that you want to convey, that the words, the reference, the signifiers, the words, the signifiers that we use are always taken in a corrupted manner. The one who hears them, in their mind, it takes a different form than when we are talking about it. And we see that this kind of language game references keep coming up, that I asked you how you like for that declension, good, better, best, bested. So these are, declensions are old, something Latin or Greek languages where with the change of a verb, the subject changes, or other forms of the verb changes. We also have it in Sanskrit. And Nick says, I really do not know what to say. So he's not quite good at playing this language games and everything. And he says that, all right, what do you want me to say? Do you want me to say it's funny so you can contradict me and say it's sad? Or do you want me to say it's sad so you can turn around and say, no, it's funny. You can play that damn little game the way you want, So it's always, whenever it's like you try to capture one side of the things, the other side becomes manifest. And when you reach out for that other side, you kind of lose grasp over this side. It's almost the nonsense that you see in the Alice novels by Lewis Carroll, and it would be really interesting to pair that nonsense, that those kind of language games that happen in Alice in Wonderland with this play, where meanings are very difficult and almost paradoxical. They are arrived at paradoxically, while sense does not work, while it moves. And Deleuze has a book called The Logic of Sense, where he talks about the relationship between sense and paradox, that sense and lack of sense kind of move together, that when we grasp something, we also grasp the other end of it, which can often be sometimes very contradictory. Yes, like I was mentioning, that kind of authority, that kind of sense that he says, George says here, I know I told you. I shall probably tell you several more times. Martha tells me often that I am in the history department as opposed to being the history department. In the sense of running the history department, I do not run the history department. So he does not have a figure of authority. He is not an authority figure in a sense. He has failed in that. So at a point, Honey and Martha have left the stage, and Nick and George are sitting together. We find George and Nick sitting together often at the same time, and Martha returns and says, did you two have a manly talk? Asks Nick, did you figure out George's side of things? Did he tell you his side of things? But we see that George can never communicate his side of things to Nick because Nick cannot understand him. There is a huge gap. There's a huge gap of communication between Nick and George, which makes it impossible. So, but we see that at such certain banal points that they connect, that George says, looking at the ceiling, that what are they doing up there? I assume that's where they are. It's about Honey and Martha. And Nick says with false heartiness, you know women. So this is typical male talk. You know women, male bonding. And we see that George tried to bond with Nick outside these sexist, misogynist comments like, oh, you know women, how long they take when they go to the bathroom and stuff like that. But that's not what Nick picked up on. This is what he's picking up on. This is what adds to the vulgarity of the play. And if you see later that George tells to Nick that you find me deplorable when you are the one who's thinking of doing deplorable tasks, you're telling me that I'm the deplorable person. So it's almost what Manto said when his short stories were criticized for being, obscene. He said the society is obscene that I'm writing about, and that society is coming back and telling me I am obscene just because I'm writing about the society. So it's an obscene society. It's a decadent society that Albee is writing about. And if you're writing about a society like that, you must get your hands and pen dirty. And we have references here to having kids, that Nick says that we'd like to wait some time till we have kids. And we see that both the couple, they do not have kids. So I'd like to linger here a bit. So this lack of kids, if you see, again, like if I go back with the parallel with T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, you'd see Wasteland, there is this impossibility of regeneration that is constantly highlighted in the poem. You see there are references to taking the pill, the pill that had come up, that contraceptive pill which made it possible to have sex without conceiving a child, and kind of Eliot in a manner adds it to a sort of deadness, a sort of lack of regenerative possibility in the play. I mean, in England, I mean, it has his own political views, it has its own moral problems, but I would just like you to pick up on this thematic similarity, not go into whether it's the right statement to make or the wrong statement to make, the right statement to make or the wrong statement to make. So this lack of children, this lack of kids, and also we must signify that in the play we might think, oh, it would be nice to have kids, kids would be such a relieving presence in the play, but we see that the one child that is spoken about in the play is also one that kills its parents. So we see that it's also not very clear in that way, that that, oh, if only they had kids, that would be a solution, it would be something of a regeneration that would come in, the world would again be nice, productive. It's not quite like that, it's more problematic than that. And so, but there's a sort of end of civilization that is highlighted with kids. Even if there are kids that kill their parents. And later on, there's a reference made that that kid who kills his parents could be George himself. So George, who's unable to procreate, to have a progeny, is also someone who kills his parents. So he's almost like a figure of apocalypse. There is a sort of apocalyptic quality that comes in it. I mean, the World War had just ended 17 to 18 years back. This is 1962. There was this huge explosion at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, which created this end of world apocalyptic sense. And this is the Cold War rolling in. And with the Cold War also we have another sense of apocalypse coming in, that there could be nuclear missiles coming in from Russia that might that might fall in the USA, and USA might shoot off other missiles into Russia. So the Cold War is coming, and there's this fear of nuclear war. People are building shelters to go into, to hide into, and that kind of sense creates a sense of the end of world apocalyptic thing, where regeneration is not so much about a hopefulness about children coming in and making this world again nice, but a sort of a corruption that has seeped in, which makes it difficult to see a sort of future, which makes it look like this is the end of the world. And we see that these are four people, and we see the apocalypse is also associated with the four horsemen of the apocalypse. We have the four horsemen who bring disease and death and war and famine in the world, who bring in this apocalypse. But again, as we say, this is a parody, this is a sort of deflation. So we do not have these grand apocalyptic figures riding on horses coming in with death and no. But these are kind of deflated figures, and these are not all like horsemen, but there are women also, most importantly, who can be as devastating as the men when it comes to doing damage. And then George says, again, continues that sense of childlessness, apocalypse with this following line that I'd like you to take a notice of. This is your heart's content, Illyria. Illyria is like ancient land, you can find references to it even in Shakespeare. Penguin Island, it's from one of Anatole France's story, and Penguin Island is destroyed. Gomorrah, another biblical site that is destroyed, and they live in Carthage. We'd have to think about it. Carthage is another place that fell, that was plundered, that was destroyed by Roman soldiers. You think you're going to be happier in New Carthage, eh? So New Carthage, this sense of Carthage, this New Carthage is also like Carthage has been destroyed, but this is the new Carthage waiting for its destruction, waiting for another kind of apocalypse to come. And maybe, what we have here is kind of sort of hopelessness of a regeneration. Maybe what you need is this kind of new Carthage, and again a kind of raising down on which new things can be built. But that is not a hint that has been produced in the story. But that is something that we have in Eliot's Wasteland in the final lines, where he asks for the Ganga to flow from heavens and to make the earth fertile again, right? So after a sort of destruction, there is hope for regeneration. Only after total destruction may be there, because we are so busy with destructive impulses right now that we cannot think of regeneration. So maybe after total destruction, there will be a possibility of regeneration, life after the apocalypse, life after the ice age has passed. Again, this part also carries on this sort of deadness that, the old man wouldn't like it. George says, Martha's father expects loyalty and devotion out of his staff. I was going to use another word. So staff is also like, it has a very phallic connotation with it. Staff is also something the king holds when he rules. So you see that contrast the figure of Martha's father with the figure of George. Well, Martha's father is a successful patriarch, a successful figure of authority. George is not so. George is emasculated, while Martha's daddy has strong hold on his staff. And Martha's father expects his staff to cling to the walls of this place like the ivy, to come here and grow old. So, and there is this reference to a professor of Latin and elocution who actually fell in the cafeteria line one lunch. So there is death, and we see that Latin and is a dead language. So we have this sort of deathness with language and deathness of people coming together. And see that we make excellent fertilizer. So this is what I was hinting about when I was saying that the possibility of regeneration after apocalypse, after death. So maybe on the dead bodies new things will grow. That's the kind of vision that we have. But it's impossible for anything to grow in this era of deadness. So again, like, and this is the part where Honey and Martha have come back, and Honey says to George, I didn't know until just a minute ago that you had a son. George says, willing, as if struck from behind. What? So you get the sense like that, he was kind of expecting it because he's the one who put the idea in Martha's head. But you can see that they're acting. They're also acting on the stage. And the fact that they're acting, it is made so explicit that they are on a stage that makes this confusion of illusion and reality more interesting. So he's dumbfounded, he's struck, like what? It has been brought up. But it's almost like he's the one who planted the idea in her head. And here's a reference that Martha is changing. So Martha hasn't yet come back into the scene. She's changing. She's going to come back into as a changed person. If not a changed person, as in changed clothes. And he says that Martha is not changing for me. So Martha and George cannot probably change any further. They're too set in their ways. They're old. One of the parts of being old is that they're too set in their ways. They cannot change anymore. There's no possibility of changing. And says that you are being accorded an honor, and you must not forget that Martha is the daughter of our beloved boss. She is his right ball, you might say. Again, like here, we have this references that George is emasculated, that he has not done good enough with his work, that George is a bog, a fen, a GD swamp, swamp, hey swampy. So he's being called these things. He's being constantly cajoled into sort of like in pejorative terms. He's being called bad things in pejorative terms. And here we have this side that George says that Martha asks him, will he light her cigarette for him? George says, no, there are limits. I mean, man can put up with only so much without he descends a rung or two on the evolutionary ladder. So you can see that there's this talk of evolution, this talk of progress. We think of the evolution as a form of progress, as OE, but he's talking about going down a rung or two on the evolutionary ladder, becoming less than who is, as if he has come to a point, so he's becoming less than human. And I pointed out that this idea of dehumanization in the play, that the people have become less than human in a sense, that the high dignity to which human beings should hold themselves, that is falling down. So he's saying that I feel like I'm falling down the evolutionary ladder. I'm becoming less than human. If this is, but again we see that this progress is also being criticized in Albee, that this progress has not been a very clean progress. It's not something that is very clean, that comes to a very fruition, to a very fruitful culmination, or it's a very fruitful process. Even evolution has not been a very kind process. We've had wars, it is like continuously being haunted by wars. I'd like to end lecture 2 on that note today, and we'll finish Act 1 in the next lecture. Thank you for your attention.